and welcome to the Weekly Defense Podcast. This week, brought to you in partnership with our sponsor CDS Defense and Security. I'm your host, Alex Valenti, and also with me today are Tim Fish on the land desk, naval reporter Harry Lai, and a guest of honor joining us from Turkey, Tayfun Özberk. Hi all.
Hello, Alex.
Good evening.
Hiya.
Hi guys. So Tayfun, welcome to our podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here. I was wondering, for our listeners, could you introduce yourself briefly?
Of course, I am Tayfun Özberk. I am Shephard Middle East correspondent for the last 6 months. I have attended IDEF 2021 last week with my colleague Cem Devrim Yaylalı. I am here to share my observation from the expo.
Great. So shows are starting again. It's quite exciting, and I'll have plenty of questions for you on how it felt. But before that, so for our listeners, as you may have guessed from the introduction of Tayfun, today we will be discussing some of the highlights from the floor of IDEF 2021. While the show took place last week and concluded last Friday, as you will have seen, last week's podcast was dedicated mostly to the recent event in Afghanistan, and there was a very interesting conversation with all of experts on it. So this week, we will delve into IDEF 2021 in more depth to give you more of a coverage. Also, later in the show, we will focus on the naval domain and hear from QinetiQ about swarm tactics and countermeasures to this threat. And now, time for a quick look at the headlines from this week. So, Harry, what were your findings from this week? What stories did you publish that you want to tell us about?
Yeah, so probably the most interesting was got some information from the US Navy and Marine Corps about their large-scale exercise 2021. So they hosted a SYNC-X and sunk their last Oliver Hazard Perry class frigate using kind of Super Hornets, F-35Cs, the P-8 Poseidon, the Marine Corps' new Nemesis kind of robot missile launcher, and the USS Chicago submarine. So they launched a mix of torpedoes, harpoon missiles, joint standoff weapons, and the naval strike missile to sink the ship.
Oh, very interesting. Thank you. And Tim, what about you? What stories do you want to tell us about today?
I was just writing a story on an RFP that came out from Australia for a new personal electronic countermeasure system, which is going to be designed to support individual soldiers. It's a bit of a challenge technologically because the system, the electronic countermeasure system, is usually mounted on vehicles. So to have it small enough for an individual person to carry and protect them from remote controlled improvised explosive devices is going to be pushing the edges of what can be achieved in terms of miniaturization. So it's an interesting one to going forwards anyway.
Okay, very interesting story as well. And I encourage our listeners to go have a look on the website to find out more about these two topics. Also, from me, I wanted to mention that Army 2021 is taking place in Moscow this week. And it looks like Russian company Remdizel is expanding its family of Typhoon K armored vehicles. The company unveiled 2 new variants of its K-4386 series at the event. One is a multi-purpose utility vehicle, and the other is designed for special forces missions. The writer notes that these vehicles are designed for the Russian airborne forces and that should enter service after trials. And finally, as our editor Tim Martin is not among us today, I just wanted to quickly mention his piece on the implication of Canada's new elections for defence. The election will take place on the 20th of September, and as Tim notes, one of the country's major programs, the Future Fighter Capability Project, is likely to become a hot political topic. More on this and other stories, of course, is on our website. So now, let's get back to IDEF. So, Tayfun, as I was saying, I have many questions for you. It must have been quite excited to be back at a defense show, you know. How did it go? What was the feeling?
Well, the IDEF was supposed to take place at the end of May, but it was postponed due to the pandemic situation. The number of the COVID cases were extremely high in May, so we had to wait another 3 months. Before the exhibition, I assumed that the attendance would be low due to the COVID outbreak. But upon entering the exhibition area, I realized that I was completely wrong. There were lots of exhibitors and visitors. It was very crowded. People were very interested in the show. There were over 1,000 exhibitors from 53 countries, and delegations from 83 countries visited and met with the defense companies of Turkey. As far as I saw, many European companies attended the show, including Thales, Leonardo, MBDA, and etc. But the largest companies of the United States were missing, such as Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, probably because of the CAATSA sanctions imposed on Turkey. I tried to visit as many companies as possible, and I will talk about the most significant products and projects according to me.
Okay, well, that sounds really interesting, and I guess somewhat also promising for the shows that are coming up. You know, I mean, there's the SEI in London in September. There's going to be another few ones as well. So let's hope that this is a good trend, and hopefully also that we'll get to see American companies in other shows. So thanks for this quick tour, and so. What first story do you want to share with us about IDEF 2021?
The first topic I want to talk about is the products of the Turkish aerospace industries, or TAI. They attended the show with many products in a so wide area. They showcased a mock-up of TFX national fighter aircraft, Hürjet jet trainer aircraft, and helicopters, including Attack variants and Gökbey indigenous general purpose helicopter, and of course unmanned aerial vehicles.
Okay, so what was so exciting about this? Did you get to talk to the company?
Yes. I attended the press conference during the show made by the CEO of TAI. He made important statements about the schedule of the projects. He said that there will be 3 major milestones on March 18, 2023. Hürjet and Attack 2 helicopters will take to the skies, and TFX national fighter will roll out of the hangar on the same date. I can say that releasing an exact date excited the experts and enthusiasts in Turkey. I also visited TAI's stand during the show and asked some questions about the progress of Attack Helicopters Phase 2 project. I learned that TAI has completed the qualifications and delivered 8 helicopters to the Turkish Armed Forces. They are planning to continue deliveries in the following months. I also got information about the indigenous helicopter engine TS1400, and it's on schedule. After it's qualified, it will be fitted the Gökbey helicopters.
All right. And so how are these programs really important for Turkey?
They are very important, especially the TFX program and Attack 2 program, the most important projects of the TAI, I can say that. Also, I talked with the Aksungur unmanned aerial vehicle program manager. During the show, I made a short interview with him.
Okay, and what did he say? So what was the findings on that side?
Aksungur is coming soon. It's very close to the delivery. It completed the live firing trials against sea and land, targeted with various guided munitions. But I want to focus on its anti-submarine warfare capabilities, which is quite important for the Turkish Navy, because the most important benefit of this drone to the ACW efforts is its continuous existence in the operation area. It can cover the area with electro-optical sensor for 24 hours, and this distorts the snorkel period of the diesel-electric powered submarines. And it is a very disturbing asset for the submarines. The TAI officials told me that they are working on to fit Aksungur with acoustic sensors. I learned that they will realize this project in 3 phases. In the first phase, they will monitor the pre-launch sonobuoys, and then the data will be analyzed and interpreted in the second phase. The third and the final phase will provide the UAV launch actual sonobuoys, the mini-sized sonobuoys. The project officer told me that they will finish the first 2 phases by the end of the year. This is very important because the only drone that can launch and monitor sonobuoys is MQ-9 Sea Guardian of the United States. On completion, Aksungur will be the second one in the world and contribute to ACW operation with its sonobuoys.
Okay, yes, that sounds... I'm glad you mentioned the mini sonobuoys because I was wondering how... I mean, I remember seeing sonobuoys and those are big, so fitting them on an unmanned platform would have been a challenge. So I don't know if Tim or Harry, do you have anything you'd like to ask Typhoon about this?
Yeah, absolutely. So looking at your coverage, one thing that struck me was there was a few kind of uncrewed surface vehicle programs and USVs that you wrote about. I just wondered how heavily was the kind of Turkish Navy investing in these?
Well, Turkish Navy has high expectations from USVs. However, we don't know how many USVs were required by the Navy, of course. But we already know that such systems would be extremely useful in the littoral waters of the agency. And so I'm pretty sure that the Turkish Navy would receive a large number of USVs. Last month, Turkey's procurement agency launched a tender for 2 USVs. And one is for surface warfare and another is for platform and base protection. There will not be a bulk procurement, only prototypes. I think we will see the number of the USVs the Turkish Navy would get after the second tender, I guess.
And just sticking on naval, one thing I've noticed you've written quite a lot in the past of the Turkish Navy developing indigenous versions of systems that they had previously been buying from elsewhere, so naval guns and onboard systems. How evident was that at IDEF? Was it quite clear that there was a big push to develop more indigenous systems?
We cannot say Turkey has been building everything for a ship, but develops so many systems. This is a road, and on this road, Turkey has come a long way, and it will continue on this path, I guess. To answer your question, I can say yes, because in IDEF, I saw many domestically produced products that would be used on the new warships. For example, a sonar company, Armelsan, launched indigenous mine detection sonar system, and MKA showcased the indigenous 76mm naval gun and a new close-in weapon system similar to Phalanx. And I saw 2 projects to replace rolling airframe missile RAM systems. And Turkish leading defense company Aselsan introduced many sensors, including Akrep fire control radar, Cenk surveillance radar, and etc. These systems will be fitted to I-class frigates, Barbaros-class frigates during the medium life upgrades, and of course, future LHT Anadolu.
And so, it's good you mentioned Anadolu at the end there, because obviously you touched on the sanctions earlier on, potentially being a reason why kind of some of the US companies might not have been there. And obviously that affected the program with kind of F-35B no longer equipping it. So were there any updates on the plans for operating drones from the carrier?
Well, as we know, Turkish government has decided to convert the LHT Anadolu into a drone carrier, and they have been working on it for half a year. But the latest news is during an online event in July, the technology manager of Turkey's drone manufacturer, Baykar, his name is Selçuk Bayraktar, made critical statements about the drone launching and securing systems of LHT Anadolu. They will operate 2 unmanned aircraft on board Anadolu. The first one is TB3 armed drone, which is a larger and folding winged version of the combat-proven TB2 Bayraktar. Another one is unmanned combat aircraft. It's also called unmanned fighter, Muse, which was introduced during the same online event. He stated that the LHT will be outfitted with a rolling system to launch the drones, and the security nets will be used to secure the drone after landing. The technology manager claims that the security nets will be used just in case because the drone would stop before hitting the nets. He said that they are on schedule and TB3 drones will be ready. TB3 drones and the launch and securing system will be ready before the LHD is commissioned, but the MIUs will be available in 4 or 5 years. Turkey hopes to take Anadolu into service in the next year.
Right. Well, thank you for this, Tayfun. And Tim, I can see that you're getting ready to say something. Do you want to add something to all this as well?
Oh no, just on the naval side. I quite liked the Typhoon story on the new variant of a High-Star class offshore patrol vessel, and then listing kind of all the equipment that's going to go on it: anti-ship missiles, air defence. So I don't think it's really an offshore patrol vessel. It sounds more like a corvette by the sound of it, because it's got a pretty powerful sensor and weapons packages on it. I was just wondering if that's what you kind of felt about that particular product that was announced at there.
Well, the OPVs showcased during the show was the convertible version. They are not the actual setup. The OPVs will not be armed heavily, but they tried to show during the show that they can convert it into a corvette, even if needed during a conflict or a high tension. They will outfit the ship with anti-ship missiles and HISAR surface-to-air missiles when it's needed. It's just the convertible version of the OPV. But Turkey will not commission the OPVs in that setup. The OPVs named HISAR class will only have guns.
Right, okay, yeah. I saw that the ship is 108 meters, displacing almost 3,000 tons. So still pretty big for an OPV, but it makes sense to be able to have a convertible, flexible ship that can install these modular packages at a later date if they're required. Yeah, that's good. Just moving on to the land side, I was interested with your story about the launch of the by FNSS of the new PARS 4 6x6 and 8x8 vehicles. I mean, it was the first time I'd heard of this, because when I was at IDEF a few years back, they had launched the PARS 3 6x6 and the PARS 3 8x8. Although I assume those vehicles are related. This is just the next variant from those ones, is it, that has been modified specifically for special operations?
This is the only special operations armored vehicle in the world with dual turrets. The project officials claim turrets provide 360-degree coverage of incoming adversary targets, and it also provides greater protection against mines and other explosives, the officials claimed.
And I read that the special operations units will get 12 by the end of this year. Is that the only orders that they have for this vehicle? And also, what do you think about the future of the 8x8 vehicle?
I don't know information about that. As far as I know, they will complete the delivery of 12 vehicles by the end of this year.
Right. Okay, then. Yeah, I mean, it's just interesting because the Turkish army had a requirement for 472 special purpose vehicles, which was the PARS 3 6x6 variant. So I was wondering if this new PARS 4 variant was a part of that requirement going forwards. So it seems to raise some interesting questions about what FNS is doing when they're producing new variants of these 6x6 and 8x8 vehicles every couple of years to meet program requirements. But then the actual deliveries or orders of large numbers of these vehicles never seem to materialize. Do you know if the Turkish army has any prospect of ordering large amounts of 6x6 or 8x8s?
When I asked about the future procurement plans, I couldn't get information about this.
Yeah, that's quite telling then, isn't it? I suppose.
Yeah.
There's a lot of equipment at the show. That a lot of new prototypes emerging, which all look very interesting, but a lot of it still has yet to be officially ordered through our RFPs. And I guess the other article I found quite interesting actually was the multi-role M113 unmanned ground vehicle variant that FNSS also displayed. Can you tell me a bit more about that? Because I remember that they were back in 2019. They were trying to install a remote-controlled variant of it. So it looks like they've actually progressed quite far with that particular product.
Yes, the Gölge Süvari means Shadow Rider UGV were showcased during the show, and an improved version of the UGV. The new one is fitted with 25mm turret and features autonomous driving capabilities. And I talked with the program manager of Shadow Rider during the show, and he told me that this is the first and only heavy class autonomous UGV in Turkey. He also told me that the development is still ongoing, and the vehicle's remote controlled unmanned turret was designed particularly for this UGV. They are looking forward to Turkish government's request for proposals, he added.
Oh yeah, that sounds quite interesting that they've found a way to provide autonomous systems for the M113, because that will give the M113 potentially a role in the future as well, if they can upgrade it and make it autonomous and work in partnership with other armoured units as well. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. It's pretty interesting. Hopefully the RFP will come out and we'll see some developments there in the future.
Thanks, Tim, for all these really interesting questions. And I just wanted to take the opportunity here to jump in, because Typhoon, you mentioned the UGVs, and that made me think about this other very interesting article that you wrote about the digital troops concept. So could you tell us a bit more about that, please?
Yes, digital troop concept, I think it was the most significant project during the show. This is an inspiring project. A project looks at the battlefield out of the box. The company claims that they are forming the battlefield of the future, and this is a futuristic project. As far as I learned, the goal of this project is to combine manned and unmanned assets in one network to fight together. It has developed a system that allows UAVs and UGVs to work together in the field to give support to security forces. The system is based on 3 pillars. The first one is training and simulation, which aims to prepare the troops with real-time scenarios by using virtual reality and augmented reality. And the second is wearable technologies for the soldiers, including exoskeletons, which improves troops' performance by allowing them to carry greater loads, move quicker, and utilize heavier weaponry. And the third and the most essential element is integrated autonomous robotic systems.
Right. Well, that sounds quite familiar. Also, it's interesting. As you said, it's quite avant-garde, and it makes me think about an article I wrote recently about urban warfare, and the augmented soldier with things like the exoskeleton, as you mentioned, and also this thing of the networked, in a sense, soldier with sensors was something that came back quite a bit. Harry, is there anything you want to add about this digital troop concept, or does that link into anything you've heard on other aspects?
It's just interesting, I suppose, because if you look across the world, kind of, it feels like every armed forces has got some form of digital soldier project going along, whether they call it that, but it usually has digital in the name. And it's just interesting to see that across the world there's all these lines of development going on that kind of seem to be doing the same thing, and so everyone's clearly got the same idea.
Yes, it does sound like it, doesn't it? And Tim, is there anything you would like to add?
Just from the land side, again, is what it'd be interesting to see what the update is on how the Altay main battle tank is being developed, because we mentioned earlier in the podcast that Turkey is moving quite rapidly towards the indigenous production. A lot of its platforms and systems and subsystems, sensors, weapons, and it's done a pretty good job. Unfortunately, for producing a main battle tank, it hasn't progressed as fast as they would have liked. The program's been running since about 2007, and it's had to change contractor. They possibly may not get a tank engine, so that might again restrict the program even further. The current company that's supposed to be building the main battle tank has no experience whatsoever in manufacturing tracked vehicles either. So it looks like Altay is another one of these sort of long-running land programs that may yet fail to materialize.
So thanks, Tim, for this insight on Altay, but also, so we're coming close to the end here. So maybe who has, do you have any closing thoughts on everything we've just discussed? For instance, Harry, what about you? Do you have anything you would like to add?
I think one thing that's interesting is obviously sanctions make it harder in the short term to procure and develop equipment. But in the long term, if Turkish industry gets these projects right and is able to develop lots of indigenous systems, it could in some ways have long-term benefits in that they'd be able to export indigenous systems more easily, develop capabilities more easily without having to rely on international partners or having to work with international partners. So it'd be interesting to see the long-term effects.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And Typhoon, what about you? Any concluding remarks on what you've seen in IDEF and the situation in Turkey in general in regard to defense?
I really enjoyed IDEF. I saw so many products, and I agree with Harry because the CAATSA sanctions triggered so many projects. In fact, Turkey has been working on indigenous projects for at least 2 decades and established a good ecosystem in Turkey. And these projects will take some time, but after achieving the goals, for example, Turkey is building indigenous frigates, I-class frigates, TCG Istanbul. It's a big challenge for Turkey because the indigenization rate is about 80%. It's not easy to develop. But after commissioning the first ship, Turkey will have a locally produced frigate, and all of the systems will be integrated and working together. It will be proven. And the IDEF showed that capabilities of Turkey to produce what is needed domestically. And IDEF showed me the many evidence about this approach.
Yes, definitely. From what you've shared with us, that's how it sounds like. And Tim, what about you? Any concluding remarks on everything we've just discussed?
Just to concur with the others that Turkey's journey to manufacture more of its defence equipment in country has progressed slowly but steadily, and they've reached the point, especially on the naval side, as Typhon mentioned, that they are producing. They're going to produce 4 high-end destroyers. They've got a program, the Milden program, to build 6 new submarines that would follow on from the Type 214 Rice class, as well as the TF 100 multi-role frigate program as well. So that's pretty impressive on that side. I think it's less impressive on the land side. As I mentioned, the programs there are kind of stalling. The numbers ordered of vehicles are small. There's the weapons carrying vehicle seems to have disappeared. Not heard any updates on the HISAR short range or medium range air defence stuff. And the marine amphibious vehicle, there's only 20 or 7 of those being ordered by end of next year. So it's a mixed bag, but overall they've done a really good job. And whether sanctions will sanctions will slow that whole process down considerably, because without access to outside technology, they're going to have to find ways and find budgets to produce these things domestically. But they'll still progress with that, but it'll just take longer, as Typhon said.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, guys, for this very interesting conversation. And thank you, Typhon, for being with us today and for the exceptional coverage that you and Cem were able to deliver at this 15th edition of the International Defence Industry Fair. For our listeners, you can find out more about IDEF news coverage, analysis, and video interviews on our website, shepherdmedia.com/news. Coming up next is Noemi Di Stefano in conversation with QinetiQ to discuss the company's approach and efforts in developing swarm attack countermeasures that could help navies tackle the threat. We will be back after the break. Don't go away.
Artificial intelligence is rapidly changing the world in which we live. Evidence of artificial intelligence is all around us and will have profound implications on everyday life in the decades to come. In the military world, artificial intelligence technologies are having a similarly massive effect and are beginning to change the face of modern warfare. Artificial intelligence and machine learning applications promise to enhance productivity, reduce user workload, and operate more quickly than humans. But this doesn't come without its challenges. How easy is it for an adversary to fool artificial intelligence systems? How well do AI systems cope with a chaotic and ever-changing conflict? And how will the human in the loop oversee AI systems on a battlefield swarming with autonomous assets? The Artificial Intelligence on the Battlefield podcast dives into these issues and more. How will artificial intelligence reshape the future of warfare? Created by Shephard Studio in partnership with our sponsor Sistel, the Artificial Intelligence on the Battlefield podcast on shepherdmedia.com/news or wherever you get your podcasts.
Greetings to our listeners. I'm Noemi Di Stefano, and for this second part of the show, I'm pleased to welcome Jules Werner, Director of Business Development at QinetiQ Target Systems. Mr. Werner, thanks for joining me today. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me.
So we're here to discuss the threat of swarm attacks to navies, a threat which is growing across the world. And we are going to look at how important it is for navies to develop tactics. And also we're going to focus on the work that QinetiQ is doing to provide an advantage to these navies and help them tackle and handle the threat. So to kick things off, Mr. Werner, can we start by looking at what are the scenarios in which we are most likely to see maritime swarm attacks?
So the sort of likely scenario that you would see a maritime swarm attack would be in close proximity shipping lanes, surprise attacks where small craft could come behind larger vessels. And, you know, you're looking usually in numbers of multiples of 2+, we class as a swarm.
And how does a swarm attack work? What do they involve? What are we likely to see when there's a swarm attack going on?
So a ship will be on passage in various locations globally, and they usually, would gather intelligence. So hopefully, the intelligence would be gathered and the ship would have an idea if they're going into an area of threat from a swarm attack. And that could be, done through radio communications or other information, but also it could be done from the upper deck crew looking out at the eyes of the ship, as well as they're using their sensors as well. And a scenario, as we mentioned before, would be more than two. And, it would really involve small craft going very fast, and I'm talking something at the speeds of 60 knots plus. And they could also be armed and have some sort of armament on them as well. They also could carry explosives and just go towards the ship to propose a threat.
Okay, so what can navies do then to outthink a swarm attack? How does the Navy develop swarm-oriented countermeasures to defend its surface ships from manned and unmanned UAVs, hostile boats equipped with missiles, grenade launchers, or packed with explosives?
So what we do from QinetiQ Target Systems, we actually have some unmanned vehicles where we actually create the swarm effect using very fast unmanned vehicles, as we call them. And we can use them in multiples of 4 to 1, what we call a control station. And we've actually operated 40 in number, which is a very complex trial. And we would do different types of tracking towards the ship so they can train and defend appropriately.
So, yeah, by reading some of the papers available on QinetiQ website, I came across a few articles that were highlighting the importance of training for navies. So I wanted to ask you, how does training against fast-moving threats then work? Is it a virtual simulated training? Is it a real-life training? Can you maybe provide a couple of examples of how you... the solutions that you offer for training?
So what we would do from a QinetiQ target systems side of the training, it is a real training environment. So what we're trying to do is provide real threat representation against a moving target. And we would start this, if it was a navy that we were training, we would start very simple. And usually that would just be an unmanned target towing another target, sort of tracking from left to right. So the upper deck crews, the bridge teams, the operations teams can then sort of try to identify whether that target is an actual threat. And then we would build on that by adding more and more targets, more maneuverability, start to become faster, weaving towards the ship so the ship can take the necessary action to train against them. And that becomes part of the actual training that we give. The value of the training really is the key before they actually destroy the target.
And would you say, are there any limitations to this training compared to then the real life scenario?
We try to make it as realistic as we possibly can, but one thing that you've got to remember, whenever we do anything of this nature with testing and evaluation, safety is always our first priority. So we always have to make sure that our training environment where we operate to do these scenarios, and that always is safety is our priority. And if there's obviously any live munitions being used as well, we have to make sure that it's in a safe area of operation as well.
Okay, I just wanted to take a look at geography and ask you what role does geography play in being able to respond to swarm attacks or vice versa, makes it very easy for the attacker to attack?
So these type of threats are usually, like you say, in close areas. Going through a canal, for instance, in flat, calm seas area. That is very sort of a prone type area where you could be attacked, by a swarm in various of numbers. Usually in big rough seas, it's very unlikely that you would see a swarm attack because the vessels themselves wouldn't be able to sort of get into that area. But it's really, sort of going through something like the Suez Canal, going in there or coming out the other end into the main Gulf area. Lots of hiding places, that's where I would sort of foresee those type threats. But, like anything, it could happen anywhere. It could happen in your home port. You've just got to be on the guard that, these type threats are out there.
And would you say that the advance in technology has played a crucial role for countries in being able to evolve the way they develop countermeasures to counter these threats?
Yeah, I think, you've got to be prepared and train and have the technology as well to be able to react to these. But I think a lot of it is you've got to be able to train for the scenario that you could end up being in. And I think that's the most key thing here.
And what is on QinetiQ anti-swarm suite then? What are the solutions that QinetiQ is offering? I read something about the Barracuda and Hammerhead vessels that have been used as targets to test weapons. Can you maybe tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I can. And you mentioned the Hammerhead there, which is one of our very successful surface targets that we use. And that's the one where I sort of mentioned before, we've done swarm attacks of, up to 40 surface vehicles, 4 being controlled by one man on a control station. A very complex scenario, but, it really tests the platform or platforms that we're actually training against. The Barracuda one that you mentioned, that can also be used unmanned. And in the past, we've actually used that as a missile targeting. But we also use that as a towing vessel. So we actually call that sort of the workhorse of the fleet because it can actually be used manned or unmanned. So the customer there is actually getting maximum benefit of purchasing such a target, but they can be used for their everyday seaboat type training And actually, when they want to do some weapon training, we can then work remotely, unmanned, to actually do some tow-in type scenarios for them.
Okay, and if you look at the sensors that the ships need to detect these threats, are there any specific kind of sensors that will help these ships?
So detecting, what we do, we have, as we do with all our sort of targets, we have a basic target, and what we have on top of that, we have them enhancements, or what we call payloads.
Yeah.
If a particular customer, and we've had it in the past, they go, that's great, but we actually want to, on our radar, we want to see that target that you're providing look bigger. So what we do then, we actually enhance what we call the RCS, which is the radar cross-section of that target, so they can identify it larger on their radar systems, on their sensors, so they can actually make the correct command decisions accordingly to help with their training.
And for example, in the vessels that we just mentioned, the Barracuda and Hammerhead, what would be then payload options be, like visual augmentation, flares, smoke?
Yeah, smoke, flares, cameras, missed distance indication is a big one, because when we do certain firing on certain missile systems and gun systems, the customer really needs to get the match training. But out of that training, they also need the data so they can make the correct analysis for their weapon system and training for their personnel. So if it's no good wasting ammunition if they're absolutely way off the actual target itself. So by us providing missed distance indicator sensors on there, it helps them to be able to train their aimers and personnel accordingly.
Okay. So, Mr. Werner, is there anything else that you would like to add? Any upcoming big project?
We're always looking at the market and what the threat is to our customers and allied forces globally. So we're as a business, we're always looking at the threat and how we replicate that threat going forward as missile systems change, as gun systems change. We always need to understand what the threat is and the what next. If there was a requirement that we saw in the future that there was a surface vessel required to do 80 knots, and that was the threat that customers wanted, then as a business, that is definitely something we would look at and try and replicate accordingly. And
can you disclose any information about your customers, who they are?
All I can say to you is that we operate in over 40 countries globally. So we're very much a global business, and we always engage accordingly, and we also have confidentially with our customers as well. So there is certain customers would use certain payloads and on their equipment, and we obviously respect that as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Werner.
Thank you.
From your home office to out at sea to on mission. Shephard News is used by more than 4 million government, military and industry professionals across the globe. So what are you waiting for? Start your 14-day free trial to premium news and join ranks with those in the know. Head to shepherdmedia.com/subscribe today.
This episode of the Weekly Defense Podcast was brought to you in partnership with our sponsor CDS Defense and Security. As always, a big thanks to everyone who took the time of being with us today. For our listeners, if you enjoyed the show, please make sure you like and subscribe, leave a review on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts from. And if you wish to know more about the market landscape of the defense sector, please visit shepherdmedia.com/subscribe and redeem your free trial to our premium news, where you can get international coverage of equipment innovation, company news, program updates, and more from our team of expert journalists. Until next week, thanks for listening.